Hello, and as always, a very warm welcome to the Rylands Lunchtime seminar series. My name is Stefan Hans, here from the John Rylands Research Institute and Library at the University of Manchester, and I'll be chairing this session today, which is entitled Ancient and Modern Lives of an Ancient Egyptian Papyrus. Before I introduce our speakers, there are a few things worth mentioning. First of all, this event is being recorded. It will be edited and made available on the John Rylands Library YouTube channel. Auto subtitles are available using your own settings. We are using a Zoom webinar format, so this means that your camera and your microphone are disabled on entry. And at the end of the session, we're going to have around 10 minutes for questions. So if you would like to ask one, and I highly encourage you to do so, please make use of the Q&A function, and these questions will be then selected and conveyed to the panel by me as the chair of this session. But without further preamble, I'd like to introduce our speakers today. Dr. Marina Escolano-Poveda is a senior lecturer in classics, ancient history, and Egyptology at the University of Liverpool. She holds a PhD in Near Eastern Studies from the Johns Hopkins University, and Marina also held a number of highly prestigious fellowships, among others the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation Fellowship at the Eberhard-Karls-Universität Tübingen. And Marina is no stranger to us, as you will know. She also has been a lecturer here in Egyptology at the University of Manchester in 2021 and 2022, so welcome back. And her research focuses on the literature, religion, philosophy, and society of Greco-Roman Egypt, in particular the study of the intellectual milieu of the Egyptian temples. Here, with a particular focus on astral sciences and the composition of the Greek Hermetica. As you shall see in a minute, she's also involved in the edition of Demotic papyri and ostraca from different international collections, and she's a highly prolific author of various field-shaping publications, among others the widely praised monograph, The Egyptian Priests of the Greco-Roman Period, and recent articles on demotic almanacs and demotic hieratic horoscopes in the Journal for the History of Astronomy and Encoria. Presenting with Marina is our very own Dr. Elizabeth Carr. Elizabeth is the collection care manager at the University of Manchester Library. She has over 2 decades of experience in conservation, specializing in paper and book conservation since 1997. She has a training record and education record that reaches from Barcelona to the V&A in London. She's accredited by the Institute of Conservation, and before joining Manchester in 2017, she worked at such esteemed institutions like the Royal Museums Greenwich, the V&A Museum, and the Generalitat de Catalunya, among others. We know her as being very passionate about exploring innovative techniques and materials to enhance conservation and preservation practices. So we are very excited for both of you talking to us today. And over to you.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction and for the invitation to present this project. We are going to be presenting this lecture jointly, and we have titled it Ancient and Modern Lives of an Ancient Egyptian Papyrus. And so I will start talking about the ancient life of the papyrus, and then Elizabeth will take us to all the things that have happened to the papyrus during modern times. So to get started, I am going to be articulating this first part around 5 main questions. First, we're going to ask how this papyrus was written, the language, the scripts. Then we will look at what it says, who wrote it, when and where it was written. And in the end, we will ask, what is it? What this document actually is. All right. So Papyrus Rylands Demotic 9 is a very long papyrus roll. As you can see, it is 4 meters 25, and it is written on both sides. So this allows for a lot of text to be written on it. We have 25 columns We have 14 columns on what we call the recto. If you think of a papyrus is made of papyrus fibers, fibers from the plant of papyrus that are arranged in a crisscross pattern. The recto is the side that has the fibers in horizontal lines, and the verso is the side that has the fibers in vertical lines. The recto was the main side of the papyrus because you could use those fibers as guidelines. So it was the side that was written first. And as you can see, is the side that is fully written. The scribe started writing here, and this text is written from right to left. This is the direction in which you write demotic. And then when he got to the end of the papyrus, to this side, he turned it over and he continued writing on the verso, and he wrote a few more columns. So what is actually written here? Well, I have used these colors to divide up the text into different sections because even though we're talking about Papyrus Rylands Demotic 9, this is actually not entirely true. It is written in Demotic, but it also uses another script. So the parts that you see here written in red or marked in red, in green, and in purple are written in Demotic, but there is a section here that is written in another Egyptian script. This is called hieratic. So what is hieratic? Well, the ancient Egyptians wrote in different scripts. The most famous one is the hieroglyphic script. So all the monuments in Egypt are written in hieroglyphs. It's the most characteristic script. It's a script that uses signs that are figurative. We can identify very clearly what they are. You can see here in the first column that you can identify a man, different birds. But obviously, if you need to write a document, this is not very effective. You would spend a lot of time writing all these little details that you see in the hieroglyphs. So from very early on, the Egyptians developed other scripts, more cursive, that would allow them to write faster. So you can see that in this third column, hieroglyphs can be simplified to their main traces. This is still called hieroglyphs, but we call them cursive hieroglyphs. But if we take them into a little bit more cursive stage, a little bit more simplified, we find what we call the hieratic script. It derives from hieroglyphs, but it just traces the main elements of each sign. You can see that the birds in this case are basically only distinguished by this little tick that distinguishes the owl from this little quail tick. This script continued developing throughout Egyptian history to become more simplified. And around 700 BC, we find another very simplified script that is what we call demotic. So demotic derives from hieratic, and it reduces the signs to very, very simple traces. It's actually practically impossible to distinguish the origin of this sign in, for example, the owl here. This shows just a few examples of these different scripts so that you can compare them. Hieroglyphs on stone are very detailed. Hieroglyphs on papyrus can still keep a lot of detail. Here we have cursive hieroglyphs, which have simplified mainly the details inside. Then hieratic is more cursive. And demotic, which was used for around 1,000 years, also displays some evolution and becomes even more simplified. So going back to Rylands 9, now we can see how these scripts would be distributed. The language that is used throughout the papyrus is the ancient Egyptian language. And let's look now at what the papyrus actually says. Each one of these colors indicates a different part in this document. We start in red with part 1, and this is what we could call a framed narrative. If you think of stories, for example, like the Arabian Nights, a framed narrative is a narrative that starts the story, and then it has different other narratives embedded in it. In this case, the text that we have in green is another narrative that is embedded within this text here. And then we have two parts at the end. So if we start with this first part, this frame narrative is narrated by a man called Petese. This is a temple scribe. And we call this text the petition of Petese because he is petitioning a high official of the Egyptian government in year 9 of the Persian king Darius. The Persians conquered Egypt at this point. And he is petitioning him concerning a series of bad deeds that have happened to his family throughout time. But the interesting thing is that the text doesn't start presenting it as an actual petition, indicating what the purpose of the text is. It actually starts with a narrative, and it tells us that a certain el-Hibeh went to the temple of the city of Tujoy. Tujoy is a city in Middle Egypt, and requested a stipend that was due to him. However, the temple didn't have money to pay this stipend to him, and so el-Hibeh asked to know why the temple was in such a bad state. And the administrator of the temple said, well, you need to ask this to the temple scribe, Petese. And here's where Petese is incorporated to the story, which is interesting because he is actually the narrator. Petese, who is an old man at this point, initially doesn't want to tell him anything. And el-Hibeh actually tortures Petese. He leaves him standing in the sun until he actually tells him that it is the fault of the priest of the temple, that the temple is in such a bad state. The reason why Petese didn't want to tell him is because the priest take revenge against him. And this actually happens. They beat him, and he is able in the end to escape and goes to the capital to complain. This is where the petition, actually the petitioning starts. He requests to be seen by Pharaoh. He talks with one of the highest officials of the government, and this official tells him to write his petition. This written petition of Petese is actually the document that we have in this long section indicated in green. In this long section, which is very detailed, so I'm not going to explain it in all its details, he recounts the history of his family. So if he's writing in 513 BCE, he goes back 150 years to tell the story of his family and how his family came to own the right to a very significant stipend in this temple. His great-great-grandfather, Petese I, was a very high official who was traveling through Egypt and noticed this temple in Tujoy, and noticed that even back then, this temple was not in a very good state. He decided to restore it, and he brought prosperity to the temple. To commemorate this, he created 2 stelae and 2 statues where he put all the things that he had done for the temple. This promotion of the temple generated income, and he attributed 1/5 of this income to his family. Now, the priests in the temple didn't take this very well, and throughout the generations, they tried to take this income away from the family, to the point that at the time of Petese III's grandfather, they were able to take this stipend from him when this grandfather went with Pharaoh on a trip to Syria. Since then, the family of Petese wanted to get this stipend, and they make different petitions, but they're not able to get it back. And this is what leads us to Petese's petition. So that's basically what we have here. And unfortunately, we don't know if Petese got his stipend back. It looks like he didn't. But what do we have here at the end of the papyrus? This is actually quite interesting. The blue part, which is the part that I told you that was written in hieratic, has copies of this stele that Petese I put in the temple, detailing his titles and everything that he had done for the temple. So Petese III here is giving us proof of what he is saying, of the rights of his family to this income. And at the end, and this is quite surprising, what we have is 3 hymns inspired by Amun, in which Amun is condemning evildoers. So Petese is basically condemning his enemies in this text. As you can see, this is a very detailed text with also many characters. And because of this, we're able to reconstruct with a lot of detail the family of Petese, which you can see here. So this is Petese III. This is the writer of the petition. And you can see Petese I, his great-great-grandfather up here. There are many more characters that appear in this text, and he gives us the dialogues that happen amongst all these different people. In terms of time, where are we in the history of Egypt? This is a diagram of the entire history of Egypt, and we are towards the end. We are in the first millennium BCE, when Egypt was being conquered by different peoples. And in terms of geography, we are here into Joy in Middle Egypt. The reason why this papyrus is so important is because it gives us a very detailed picture of the administration, the life in a local city in a period that is very, very interesting in Egyptian history. We are in the 26th dynasty, and we get information about what is happening during the reigns of all these pharaohs here. The 26th dynasty starts right after Egypt had been conquered by the Assyrians and had shaken off this foreign power. We have an indigenous rule for a dynasty, even though the 26th dynasty was of Libyan origin. It's pretty hard to say what is actually Egyptian at this point. And it includes also the first two reigns of what we call the Persian period, when the Persians incorporated Egypt as one of their provinces. And we can outline all this throughout the family history of Petese. What is the context of this papyrus? This papyrus appeared in a jar with 8 other documents, and they constitute a family archive. It is the family archive of this Petese. Families would keep their important documents with them because sometimes they would need them, especially for legal reasons. Here you can see images of these other papyri. And the interesting thing is that some of the individuals mentioned in Papyrus Rylands 1 and 2 are also mentioned in Papyrus Rylands 1, so we can Rylands 9. So we can see that all these documents are actually related. So coming to the end, what is this document? I've told you that it is a petition, and Petese is actually petitioning to get all these wrongs resettled, or to get justice for his family. But it is written in an unusual way. It doesn't have the normal introduction that you find in these kinds of petitions, and it is way too much detail. It provides details that would be actually unnecessary in a legal proceeding. Some scholars have indicated that this could be a literary text, it could be fictional, but as we have seen, some of the people named in the document actually appeared in some documents that we can tell that are actual documents. So what is this? Is it history? Is it a document? Is it a literary story? Well, perhaps we're adding here labels that are modern labels. If we look at what we have in the libraries of the temples of ancient Egypt, we're going to see that we have a high percentage of narratives. Why would a temple keep with their documents and their ritual texts narratives? Just for entertainment? Well, if we look at their contents, these narratives were actually what the Egyptians thought as their history. This is the time also in which the founder of history, Herodotus, was visiting Egypt. And some of the stories that Herodotus tells as the history of Egypt are the narratives that we find in the temples. So perhaps the boundaries between what is history, what is a document, and what is a narrative text are not so clear in ancient times, or wouldn't be so defined for the ancient Egyptians as they are for us. We should be very careful with applying modern categories to ancient texts. And to conclude, this text, Papyrus Rylands 9, was published for the first time in 1909 by Griffith in this catalog of the Demotic Papyri of the Rylands Library. And a new edition was published by Günther Wiedmann, a German Egyptologist, in 1998. And an interesting thing is that when Günther Wiedmann was preparing this new edition, he asked to see the papyrus, but he was actually told that this was not possible. And why? What was the reason for this? Well, we're going to learn about it now with Elizabeth.
Thank you, Marina. So yes, I'm Elizabeth, and I'm Demotic 9 project leader. I'm going to give you a brief historical context of the scroll, specifically what happened in 1967. I'm going to talk about its conservation treatment and rehousing. Demotic 9 is a 4.2-meter long papyrus scroll composed of 32 colemas, with writing covering all the recto and most of the verso. It was framed in 1899, sandwiched between two sheets of glass in a solid oak frame reinforced with steel. We don't know if the scroll was secured on the glass with adhesive tabs at that time or later. We believe Lord Crawford, who purchased the document back then and was the owner, wouldn't have a proof of this system. When it arrived to the Rylands, it was hung in the actual education room. This is where we are recording now. So you are going to see a little bit of that later on. And we have some photographic evidence of the scroll from the early 1900s, when Dr. Griffith was cataloging the Crawford manuscript collection. This is what Marina was just telling you about the book. It was a cataloging project. And also we have from 1965. Why this is important? Well, to know how much it changed 2 years later, in 67. This is when Dr. Raymond appears. Back then, she was a professor of demotic at the University of Manchester, and she was a regular visiting scholar at the Rylands. When in 67, she assessed Demotic 9, in her opinion, the scroll was sagging inside the frame and it wouldn't even last 2 years. It was agreed she would treat it. Essentially, her idea was to apply sunflower oil to nourish the papyrus and soften the adhesive tabs. Instead of applying a very small amount, Dr. Raymond applied approximately 300 milliliters all over the object, letting it soak for a week. The oil overflowed the edges, causing the scroll to adhere to the glass, as well as darkening the surface. Upon seeing the disaster, she tried to reverse it with surgical spirit and reinforced the papyrus with gum arabic. Using tepid water, she lifted part of the right side, but it became fragmented, and the treatment came to an abrupt end. What a history. Anyway, having the scroll partly fragmented, darkened with planar distortion and air pockets, and fainted media, the library was not pleased with the results. They requested help from experts at the British Museum and assistance from the University of Oxford. The treatment proposal took nearly 2 years to come up with and involved dangerous solvents and soluble nylon. We're talking about other times, okay? We don't do that anymore. Fortunately, that was never carried out, and Demotic 9 was left unframed. The last disaster happened sometime later. The top glass broke, and a crate was commissioned to store it safely. The broken glass was removed, leaving a large number of small glass shards still on the object. As you can see, due to its large dimensions, it was complex to find a space to store the crate, and one of the back rooms was used, the Anti-Dante room. Here we can see a couple of examples. And the next one, a couple of examples of the condition of the papyrus remaining on the glass before treatment. It was full of debris, dark, fragmented, and with some of Dr. Raymond's blotter pieces from the attempts to lift the object from the glass. They are the yellow papers, if you were wondering. Here we have, we had several sizes of fragments, and here we have some examples. We didn't have that many that they were that large, okay? That was very nice pieces. We had like a couple like that. In 2019, surface cleaning started, and the fragments were housed in archival folders. I was assigned this project in early 2020. I created a team, the Demotic 9 crew. But before we could make any progress, lockdown happened. On the positive side, we had time to do research and contact many experts in the field, but we didn't have access to the object. One day during lockdown, I was given permission to gather some equipment from the Rylands to make an inspection elsewhere in the library. I was able to see the fragments and take pictures with a UV light torch, and upon slightly moving the fragments, I observed they were leaching into the archival folder. As you can see in the image, there's some fluorescence stains. After knocking on several doors at the university, Dr. Christopher Murin put us in touch with Dr. Ilya Strashnov from the Faculty of Science and Engineering, who analyzed the stains on the archival folder. The results showed that heavily oxidized oil was still liquid in a liquid form in the support. It was not fully cross-linked, so it was actively damaging the papyrus further. One of our main targets was to eliminate as many fatty acids as possible. Another challenge was logistics, finding a suitable space to work safely and fit the object. Our lab was too far away in the building, and the Demotic 9 was too large and fragile to be transported there. We moved it to the Spencer room, part of the public area, which had to be closed. Mark Furness created this fantastic crate mock-up to test how we could move the long crate through the spaces. It was really complex, I have to say, and scary. We covered the wooden floors of the Grade 1 listed building and moved the glass to dog grooming tables with trespa tops and wheels just purchased for this special object. We borrowed this idea from the imaging team. Thank you for the idea. That was a game changer. We started with the dry cleaning of the glass shards and the debris under the microscope. Our wonderful imaging team did a multispectral imaging of the scroll and fragments. And this table, it was very useful because you could lower it and do all these, take all these photographs that otherwise it would be quite another odyssey. Here we can see a couple of examples. The detailed image of composite RGB is quite dark. And the image on the right is near infrared, which shows the obscure writing and indicates it's carbon-based ink. After a lot of research, we decided to use enzymes to remove the oil as much as was feasible. To proceed with the most accurate treatment, we needed to know the Demotic 9 as thoroughly as possible. Conductivity and pH were very important parameters to take into account. We took measurements of the surface with little samples of agarose using a pH meter and a conductivity meter. The conductivity, it was very low, and it's a factor to be considered on the preparation of the enzymatic treatment that we will see later. I will tell you a little bit more about it. Another important factor was the environmental conditions in the room. It was quite dry, as you can see in the graph, which affected in later stages of the treatment. Again, I'll come back on that later. On the other hand, for the enzymatic treatment to work, in our case, lipase, we needed to keep it in a constant temperature of 37.7 degrees Celsius for a period of time. That was another challenge. So we needed to find a source of heat that could keep the heat for a long period. And we were investigating between terrarium heat mats. They don't work, so don't even try it. And then the gel packs, they were all right. The only problem that we have, you can see one in the photograph. The only problem that you can find is that you have to measure how long it takes to cool off, because that will dictate the process time. So we were quite limited with that. So I did several tests using the gel packs, and it was working well, but not perfectly. I knew we could find a better heat source for our treatment. At this point, we applied to the National Manuscripts Conservation Trust for a grant, and thanks to them, we could proceed and finish the project. After doing more research, we changed the original Gelangam poultice to Sontara, not only to hold the enzymes, but also for the denaturing and washing process. I measured how much time it would take for how much time would be the most appropriate for the enzymatic process, and 45 minutes was the preferred option. This is one of the examples of the many tests that we took, but I just wanted to share it with you. And we are summarizing almost 4 years in 20 minutes, so bear with me. After extensive research, I say a lot of research because there was a lot of research, so I have to mention this word a lot. My apologies. So that was the enzymatic final formula. As you can see, the conductivity is slightly higher than the original object because for a better performance of the lipase. Then we discovered the mat. That was a game changer. It's a heated surface device that could maintain a specific set temperature as long as needed. We started to work with the little fragments, as you can see in the pictures, and there was a considerable amount of discoloration coming off. This is the setting that we had in the Spencer room. So we have very nice public areas, as you can see, so come and see us. Then when we work on the papyri, on the glass, we treated one colema at a time, but we work with the whole object in a continuous progression. Here we have an example of the enzymatic treatment on one colema using the mat. The Sontara covers the colema, all the colema, and both coleces. Coleces is the overlapping area of the colemas. We did enzymatic treatment 3 times across the whole object, including the fragments. With the team, we did something very scary, that is, we managed to tip the glass to observe the condition underneath. It was so necessary to work on an object, and not seeing the verso is nerve-wracking. So to our surprise, we saw more glass shards. We cleaned so many glass shards, but there were more underneath, as you can see in the left side image, and they were removed afterwards. Another interesting fact was the clear difference of thickness and condition between the 2 halves of the scroll. The image on the top is the center of the object. Probably they used 2 different batches of papyri. The image below shows the object edges starting to lift, a consequence of the dry conditions in the room. Do you remember that I told you it was so dry? It was feeling like, it was like being in the desert with barely 30% relative humidity. We fixed it by opening doors, using fans, and other measures. Then Marina did her magic, aligning the fragments. First on the Photoshop, and then, I mean, she could be here talking for an hour and a half at least, or 3 hours talking about this, and then the real ones. We attached the fragments with stone Japanese paper tabs adhered with starch paste. Again, we could be talking for hours, but I know that we have limited time. Then this is a detailed picture of before and after treatment. Is one of the most damaged areas, but this is the most damaged one. And here there's another set of images. I did the stitching, so forgive me about this. And this is the area where, before and after, this is the area where Dr. Raymond started to leave with tepid water. As you can see, it's quite fragmented, and we lost some of the fragments were lost decades ago, but we have a more complete object. So the frame was worked on while we were still treating the papyrus. We found some of the fragments hidden in the textile inside of the frame and added them to the collection for Marina to find their place. Claire Ridley, an accredited frame conservator, worked on the frame in her private studio. Here we can see an image of the frame worked in the studio on the right. The treated frame has generous spacing for the object to breathe and not to touch the front glass, as well as an inner barrier to avoid gassing of the oak into the object inside the frame. It has an extra perspex layer on the back to secure and protect the back glass. I have to say that Claire did an amazing job with the frame. It fitted so well and it's very well thought, everything. It's so professional. We are very happy with the results. And then the conclusion is we managed to stabilize the Demotic 9 physically and as much as we could chemically. There's not much change in color, and part of the fragments of the scroll were lost decades ago, but we have a more complete papyrus framed and soon accessible to everyone. And the next steps are to hang it in its initial place in the education room that you're gonna see in a minute. And even if it's a staff area, we would like to open it to the public next year for a limited time after the renovation of the building project finishes. Before we talk about the book, I would like to thank the NMCT for making this journey possible and my colleagues in Collection Care, especially the Demotic 9 crew. Mark Furness, Laura Snow, Sophie Coulthard, Heather Garner, Sarah Ibardi, and Elaine Sheldon. I also would like to add the imaging team and Claire Ridley, among many other people working on this project. And finally, we're working on a book about the conservation treatment of the Demotic 9 and analytical tests and much more. Marina, would you like to tell us more about it?
Of course. So we are, as you can see, in the education room. This is where the Demotic 9 will be hung. Like you can see here behind me, some of these papyri. And actually, these papyrus that you see here, this is the Demotic 1, which is one of those papyri that I was showing that was part of this family archive of Petese. This is what the Demotic 9 originally would have looked like before all the things that happened to it. So what we are planning is to publish a book that is accessible to everyone, telling about these papyrus, so explaining in more detail what it says. We will provide a new English translation. As I said, the only English translation that we have now dates to 1909, so it's pretty old at this point. And we will also detail all the conservation project that Elizabeth has been explaining, since, as she said, there's a lot more that can be said about it. So this will take a little bit of time, but I hope that this piques your interest and you will be looking forward to reading this book. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marina. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for a really fantastic presentation. Such a fantastic project, a really exciting and yet at the same time also quite tragic story, both the story of Petese as well as of the artifact. So this is the moment for me to remind everybody that we're going to have a few minutes left for the Q&A section. Please feel encouraged to make use of the Q&A function in order to ask your question, which I will then convey to the group. To the panelists, there have been a few questions already that has come through. One of them is about the very interdisciplinary nature of this project. And I guess a question for Marina would be in what ways the collaboration with conservators did shape or perhaps even alter your approach to the text as a textual artifact? That's one of the questions.
Well, it is very important, of course, to collaborate with different specialists. And in this case, especially because, as I mentioned, the text is not visible at this point. Gunther Wittmann was not able to see it when he was working on the edition. So collaboration in this case is fundamental. Otherwise, the text is not accessible. It also gives us a different perspective on the materiality of the object, on what a papyrus actually is, how delicate it can be, but also how resilient, how after everything that has happened, it is still there, and it is a material that has survived over millennia. So it really provides a different dimension that as a philologist you normally don't see. It is fundamental at this point.
Great, thank you very much. And then there's obviously a real interest in knowing a bit more about the significance of Petese and his family.
All right, so this is an interesting question. There is, as I said, this papyrus is really important for us to learn about this period, especially because we don't have so many documents from this time. It is the family archive of a local town, but we need to keep in mind that the individuals that appear here are interacting with the pharaoh, with different pharaohs. So we can see how interconnected elements like the administration, the politics, different dimensions of Egyptian society were at the time. It also gives us an idea of the accessibility of all these different levels of the administration. So if you were an individual at a particular rank of society, how far up you could go with a petition. It also gives us an idea of what was needed to get these petitions to work. There are lots of bribes at every level. You see that all these individuals are paying some of the administrators in order to have their petitions work. This is the problem of the family of Petese, is that in many cases they're not able to get what they want because someone higher up has already been bribed. Another thing that is interesting is that even though they are sort of in disgrace by the time of Petese III, the Petese that is writing, the document has a very high literary quality. So it also tells us that these individuals were receiving very high education. Basically, what Petese is doing is using literary models in order to write his petition. This is probably why we have this question of if it is a literary text or not. Another important thing is for the history of literature. We don't have any literary text in Demotic from this period, but even if this is a document, a documentary text, it is giving us an idea of what narrations at this point would sound like. And even though we don't have written text, many written texts from this period, orality was very important. So this is how stories were being told. Humans never stop telling stories. So it gives us information at so many levels: history of literature, economy, administration. It is, we could say, one of the most complex and important documents, not just for this period, but for the entire history of Egypt. I would say that it is the most important papyrus in the Rylands collection, but I might be a little bit biased.
Thank you very much, Marina. A question for Elizabeth. Obviously, you and your team have maneuvered large parts, largely uncharted terrain, if we want to say so. Lots of groundbreaking new research was involved in this project, and new materials and conservation research. And there were several elements where you said these were real game changers, such as the use of the enzymes and the lipids. So the question would be, what inspired you? Where did you get your ideas from in order to enhance such practices of conservation?
You mean why we choose the treatment that we choose for this object?
Yes, there were so many new aspects involved in the project for you and the team to maneuver. So, very general question: what inspired you? What kept the ideas coming up?
Well, we had to do a lot of research, and that was the result of each path that we were taking. We looked at the different options that we could have that would be like not doing anything. As we could see, there was the oil that was deteriorating, actively deteriorating the support, so we had to do something about it. And then, so the option of not doing anything was not the right one. well, at least not the most, the one that we would choose. And then we had the solvent one, so using solvents, but we could see that Dr. Raymond used solvents in the past, and fainted media happened. It was a disaster, and also it's a very fragile object, and it would not hold very well what is the solvents. So what we were left with basically enzymes, and we did a lot of research, and we even read articles about the enzymes in the stomach. Honestly, it was the research, because it's limited sometimes in conservation. There's quite a lot in one aspect, but on the other, you don't have a lot of papyri, enzymes on papyri. So that was that was very interesting. And we had lots of little samples to the research, very little fragments, very, very little, that it would be very difficult for Marina to find its place. So some I have to admit, they were sacrificed. Not many, just some. So that was the I could be forever talking, so I'm gonna stop here.
People, since you mentioned the famous sunflower oil, people got slightly nervous in the Q&A. I see that, and many people were asking whether other papyri in other museums and collections have been treated by Dr. Ryland as well, and they were curious to know a bit more about what happened to Dr. Ryland himself. Do we know that?
Apparently, she was in contact with somebody in Austria, I think, that he was suggesting, or at least she understood, that a little bit, that's why I said a little bit of sunflower oil. You shouldn't put at all sunflower oil, but at least he was using, I don't remember now, I don't recall the name, but he was using a little bit of sunflower oil for the adhesive dabs and to nourish the papyri. But of course, I mean, it's not using the third of the bottle. It's a little bit too much, and also it would be not that pure as we have it now. So we have to add that to the problem. It's not like what we buy now in the bottles, in the supermarket. It would be with lots of impurifications as well. So yeah, I don't recommend it to anyone. Please don't do it at home.
There have been also a few questions about the storage of this artifact, this being such a huge, large-scale, big artifact itself. Do we know how it was stored at the time of creation? That's probably a question for Marina. And how it was stored when it arrived at the Rylands, when it was purchased at the Rylands. Is there something to be said about that?
So in terms of ancient storage, most of the papyri that have been preserved to us are those that have been kept in a dry environment. And one of the places where documents were stored were actually the tombs. We normally think of tombs as the resting places for people, but actually the tombs normally had different areas. The burial chamber used to be underground. It was accessed through a shaft, but there used to be an area that was accessible, which was used by the families as a storage place. If we think of the tombs at Deir el-Medina, for example, the ones that have been found intact and had lots of items were probably used as storage spaces. We know from texts that documents were stored in these places. In the case of this archive, and many other archives and libraries, documents were stored, rolled up, and placed in jars, in ceramic jars. And this was probably the case also for this archive of nine documents. So this makes the preservation of the documents really good. And if you look at that Papyrus Rylands I that I've shown you, it is in very, very good condition. It is basically complete. So this was the condition in which it was found in Egypt at the end of the 19th century. And then it was acquired by Crawford and brought here with the other 8 documents. And
yes, so there were, as you could see, I'm just gonna change it very quickly. So you are going to, you can see 3 of the siblings, we can call them siblings, because it's the same type of frame. It was framed on the same time as the Demotic 9, and with the same system. The glass is from before 1899.
mm-hmm.
So, and it was framed in the British Museum. Doesn't mean that by the staff of the British Museum. They were cabinet makers. I'm very sorry, I don't remember their name. Yeah. But it was hung until Dr. Raymond, she said that it was stuck inside the frame and it wouldn't even last 2 years. So it was deframed then. But until then, it was in this room with the rest of the objects from this collection.
Thank you. And as a final question, there have been various questions about the new frame. Can we say a bit more about the new frame in terms of whether it's one longer sheet of glass, whether there are a few sheets connected to each other, and how we guarantee the air circulation through the mounting? I think that is summed up a few questions about the new frame. Elizabeth, if you could say a bit more about this.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you well. Sorry.
Sorry, I repeated. There were a few questions about the new frame.
Yes.
And in particular, whether it's one longer sheet of glass or few sheets connected to each other, and how we ensure and guarantee the air circulation.
Okay, so it's not a new frame, it's the old frame that, well, the original frame that it has been, how do you, it's like customized for this object to not be, for the Demotic 9 not to be squashed between the 2 glass. So the glass is one piece. We have the original glass where the object is adhered to, and then the new glass that we had to buy it from a construction company because we couldn't find a supplier, museum supplier or anything like that. Impossible with this, like over 4 meters long, so, and very narrow. So the construction company, they were, I mean, at the end of the day, is glass. It's not that it's plastic or something, it's glass. And then Claire Ridley, probably she would answer better all the questions related to the frame, because she did the magic in the frame. And the other thing that she added is the 3 pieces of perspex on the back to secure the back glass, because it's where the object is adhered to still.
Thank you very much. And on this note, it's my role to thank both of you again. Thank you, Marina. Thank you, Elizabeth. What a fantastic presentation. What a fantastic project. And also many thanks to all of your audience questions out there. And of course, to our tireless tech team. Our next seminar is going to take place next week, 30th of May. We will be hearing more about an extremely rare medieval Arabic manuscript held by the John Rylands Research Institute and Library, and innovative research collaborations that seek ways to make the manuscript more easily accessible to the global research community. So if you're interested in digital humanities, the history of science, and Arabic and Islamic manuscripts, that will be another feast. And you can find more details about this on the What's On page on the Rylands website. There you also find the Eventbrite link to register. And yes, again, thank you all so much for joining us, and we hope to see you all again on the 30th of May. Thank you very much.